Hello, everyone, and thanks for watching. I'm Rachel Franco, author of Be Yourself and the Rest Will Follow. And today I'm talking with Thommi Odom, a personal and professional growth coach who helps individuals go from stuck and stagnant to revitalized and thriving. And today we're talking about labels, and not necessarily the kind of labels that we find on our favorite pair of jeans, but the labels that we tend to assign to others and even to ourselves, and how these labels affect how we treat people and also how we might treat ourselves. So let's just get right to it. Thommi, how are you today? Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, thank you for having me. I feel so honored.
Cool. Well, you're one of my favorite people, so I'm looking forward to this. So let's just go to our first question, and that is what kind of labels do we tend to put on others? And maybe we'll get to those we put on ourselves in just a minute, but really, what kinds of labels do we tend to put on others? I would assume that there are, good labels and bad labels, correct?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And labeling the label as good or bad is a label.
Exactly.
So we label the label.
Exactly.
I think labeling really starts with self-judgment and judgment of others. And so we immediately try to size up a person based on our irrational thoughts or behaviors, and then apply that label to them. And then we put them in another label as in good or bad.
Yeah, exactly. And if I can interrupt you for just quickly, because I had a natural feeling of which ones or which kind of labels that we might tend to use more often. But, I don't want to make an assumption, but would you say, which do we tend to use more often than others, the good labels or the bad labels? And why do you think you kind of just touched on it a little bit, but why do you think we might use one kind of label more so than the other?
Yeah, I think it's about a 50-50 because we immediately judge ourselves and say either I'm okay or I'm not okay. And then we place that judgment on the next person. Either they're okay or they're not okay. Or it could be that, you know what, I'm a little better than you are, or either you're a little worse off than I am. So those are the typical broad labels that we put on people, and then we kind of narrow it down based on the situation.
Yeah, and I know I always joke with you. You didn't believe me, but I say that there's this whole cat person versus dog person, but that's kind of a label. Or you might label someone, I suppose, if we saw that someone was, pretty versus what we might label as ugly, or as heavy versus as skinny, right? These are all kinds of labels that I assume we put on people. Why do you think we have this natural tendency to want to label other people? Because I think we do. I think we do have this need in society to categorize things or put people or things in a box. Where does this need stem from? Why do we have this natural tendency, it seems, to want to label people?
Yeah, definitely. I think it starts in our early childhood. It starts with the messages that we were taught. Either it was please me, hurry up, be perfect, be strong. And so we take those messages, we play that tape in our head, and then we say, okay, if it's please me or please others, then clearly something must be wrong with me. So I'm not okay. They are okay. And so we put that label on ourselves or in the other person.
Okay. Yeah, and sometimes I think these labels can also be self-imposed. Because when I think back on my childhood, I think a lot of my own, if I were to label even myself in different ways, whether it's being perfect or what have you, was probably, I think, a lot self-imposed versus, imposed on me by either my parents or other people.
That's so true. Sometimes our culture, our social systems may impact the way that we label ourselves, judge ourselves, or judge other people.
Absolutely.
It's so true.
Yeah, and I think especially the labeling of beauty around beauty, I think is something that our culture and media plays a huge part in terms of we label someone as beautiful, and therefore that means they have this, that, and the other thing, right?
Oh, definitely.
They must have all the friends, all the this, all of that because they're pretty, or the adverse can be, I guess, true for someone who, well, you know what I mean, who might not be defined in society as that.
And it's that comparison trap is exactly what you're describing.
Yeah.
It's that comparing ourselves, then placing that judgment, that label on ourselves or the next person.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right. Related to labeling, and I know you and I have talked about this offline rather, is that tendency to, when we label, it naturally brings in what kind of assumptions and what kinds of judgments are going along with that label that we're putting on somebody else. And so how do we stop? I was going to ask you that last. How do you think how does our tendency to label others affect how we treat them. How does that affect how we act towards other people, how we treat other people? Let's say it's someone that we've seen, maybe we've just met, or someone, I guess it could apply to someone we've known, but just someone we've seen, initially, and we immediately in our minds categorize this person according to maybe our own definitions of ourselves or what society is telling us we should think. How is that impacting how we treat that person?
It definitely impacts. It totally impacts the way we communicate, the way we interact with that individual. I caught myself the other day. I thought a person was by the way she was dressed, I thought she worked in the fashion industry. Turns out she's an IT professional. I totally labeled her as this, fashion guru type person, and that was clearly not what she was. Now, did I think she was any less smart or more smart? If I was to honor my biases and honor myself, perhaps, yes, I did think that. But yeah, it definitely frames the way in which we interact and communicate with the other person.
Yeah, and I think our perceptions too. I was thinking about, there's this girl, I say girl, she's probably a young woman actually, and she started this company, and it's actually remarkable what she's achieved at her age. I think she started the company when she was 28. It's social media consulting along those lines. And I think now she's like 30 or 32, but she's grown this company into this multi-million-dollar company. But there's a tendency to look at her and think, oh, she's so young. Does she really know what she's talking about? Does she really know what she's doing? Is she credible? And that's purely labeling her based on, you're right, my perception. Of course, I've corrected my perception. I very much appreciate what she's achieved, but I think that's also an example of how we can initially look at somebody and learn even what their age or what their, how they look. She looks very, very young, and immediately make an assumption which may obviously be incorrect. Yeah. So last question, I like to offer a takeaway. So this is not just a discussion, but really, practical tips or a quick practical exercise that we can do to stop ourselves. How can we stop ourselves from labeling other people so quickly? Because I think it's something that happens almost instantaneously in our minds. It's almost subconsciously. How can we catch ourselves, if you will? What are a few quick tips or a quick exercise that somebody can do to, one, realize that they're doing it, and two, stop themselves from doing it, from labeling?
I think it just starts with, I always tell people the word intimacy, our intimate relationships. Intimacy is really into me, I see. And it's in those key relationships that we actually get a clear reflection back of our own behaviors. So I think it starts with the introspection of ourselves. Perhaps individual therapy, being honest and authentic with a close friend. But once we become more self-aware, once we really take heed of what we're seeing in our intimate relationships, we're able to self-correct and not place judgments on other people, labels on other people.
Okay. No, that's great. Well, I think that's all for now. I think it's also just a matter of catching. I know anytime you want to change a behavior, you first have to be aware that you're doing it. And then, the next time you do it, you catch, I just labeled somebody. You might not catch yourself the first time, but the more and more you're aware of it, the next time you'll catch yourself even sooner. And hopefully you'll then you won't need to catch yourself anymore. It's just finally being aware and stopping yourself.
Right. I think once we just take the labels off ourselves, get to the point of acceptance of who we are, we won't feel the need to then place a label on someone else.
Yeah, and I guess it's true. You were saying that about how ultimately it comes down to how we feel about ourselves. And when we feel good about ourselves, then we don't maybe feel the need to label somebody else as less than, or as this or as that, because we feel full with who we are. Is that kind of a fair kind of assessment?
That's very clear. That is very fair. I think it boils down to acceptance. Acceptance of ourselves and acceptance of others. And once we reach that level, we make that equation that I'm okay, you're okay, not I'm okay, you're better than me, or I'm okay and you're not as okay as I am. Once we get to that I'm okay, you're okay, then there's no need for those labels. There's no need for that judgment. Exactly.
Okay, well, thank you so much. This has been my first episode of Be Yourself and the Rest Will Follow TV. Still working on the name. All right, talk to you soon.
Thank
you. Bye.